Hi guys, you okay? Sorry I can't be there.
Yeah, great. We can hear you fine as well. Just waiting for 4 o'clock now.
Okie dokie.
I'll let you know if anybody in the room wants to speak, Chair.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gareth.
She might not be able to see him, depends on where the camera is.
Okay.
It's 4 o'clock, Chair, so I'm going to start recording now.
Okay, thank you.
You're all good to go.
Okay, thanks, Gareth. Okay, thanks everybody. Welcome to the September edition of the Safeguarding Children and Tackling Poverty Committee. So first item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Angela O'Connell, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Gareth. Okay, second item on the agenda then is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. No, okay, that's fine. Then on to item 3 in the agenda, which is the minutes of the last meeting, which was the committee that was held on the 24th of July. Someone happy to move those minutes? Yeah, Les, okay, Councillor Lindsay Walton. And somebody else can second that then?
I'll second that.
Yeah, we got moving in the second in the chair in the chamber.
Oh, that's fine. Okay, thanks both. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, so we like on to item 4 then on the agenda, which is the substantive item for today's meeting, which is Swansea's Council Voluntary and Policy Development. And I've got Lee and Anthony down to speak for that, but I can also see that Julia Mansa has joined us as well, looking very tan, Julia. So and it's nice to see you back as well, because we know Central you've been through a lot of this work. So I don't know who's leading us through today, but happy to cede the floor to whoever that is.
Thank you, Chair. That'll be me, Anthony.
Thanks, Tony.
So a bit of a recap for anyone who's perhaps not so familiar with the piece of work. The report has attached as an appendix a working document of a Swansea Council volunteering policy. The aim of the policy is to establish consistent principles and practice for volunteers that are within Swansea Council services. I will say that the policy attached at Appendix A is a working document at this moment in time. It is an in progress piece of work. Key things to note is that the draft, even from the outset of this piece of work, really we're taking account of the WCVA's principles of volunteering and the third sector support Wales good practice. Also, as you mentioned, Chair, working very closely with Julia as our main contact with Swansea Council for Voluntary Service, who is providing support, and providing that expertise and reference point for council officers. The previous update on this policy development was in April. So I'm going to focus on giving, what's happened in the period of time since then. So one of the actions to take forward from the last meeting was that we were going to liaise with our colleagues in HR and OD on this piece of work, because I know it's something that's been of great interest to that department as well. So we've been working really closely with them over the last few months, and in that work, the draft policy as it stood during July, it went forward to the corporate safeguarding operational group just for initial comments and feedback. I've not included details of that feedback within the report. It was received, it was received well, and there were comments around acknowledging that safeguarding was within the policy draft as it stood. As I said, there's been significant work with HR and OD colleagues over the last few months, and we've formed a policy development steering group, which is now working alongside the wider working group of officers that had established a while ago on this piece of work. The idea being that the steering group with myself, colleagues from HR, and Julia in a supporting and advisory capacity, kind of taking the feedback, taking the learning, and refining that document. So really trying to bring in the work that we had done up to that point, but thinking about it in the context of policies across Swansea Council, how that works, how it relates, how will it fit neatly, and reference the wider policy framework within Swansea Council. So that is ongoing at the moment. As I said, the policy that's attached is draft, and in fact, I have a meeting tomorrow with HR where we're doing some more of that refining work with the policy. And what we'll be doing, what we'll be turning our focus on from within the coming weeks is turning our attention perhaps away a little bit from the document, leaving it as a draft work in progress, but turning our attention to the development of a manager's toolkit. So that'd be a toolkit for any council officers within a managerial position or officer role where they would be working with or hosting those volunteers within the authority, providing the tools and advice so that is done in a consistent way, as well as developing a handbook for the volunteers themselves. The draft policy refers to both the manager's toolkit and the volunteers handbook. So the idea being that we focus on developing those resources so that they are in place prior to then moving the policy forward. It also gives us the opportunity through the process of developing the manager's toolkit and the volunteer handbook to reflect back on the policy and perhaps make any changes that haven't become apparent at this point, just to make sure the whole package is cohesive. In other good news, funding has been secured from the Shared Prosperity Fund to provide additional resources to help progress this work. And it's anticipated that a development officer will be in post hopefully around early 2024. That role will further support the development of the policy, but also the implementation of the policy across the council as well. And what we hope following the rollout of the policy then is that we can actually start work on developing a strategy for Swansea Council around building on that position of a consistent approach to hosting volunteers within the authority. I think a strategy would look wider than that, not necessarily just around volunteers hosted within the authority, but also recognising the role that volunteers play across Swansea. In particular, an example would be if you think about Friends of Parks groups, there are certain groups made up of volunteers that work really closely with Swansea Council. So a strategy would kind of look at that wider picture and then look to build on that. But the starting point, Chair, is getting our house in order. with the implementation of the policy and the resources that sit behind it. So from here, as I don't think this is going to be repeating really, but the next steps, just to be clear, are to finish refining the policy as we're happy with it at this moment in time, and turn our attention to developing both the manager's toolkit and the volunteers handbook. Also during that process, we're hoping to do some wider engagement work as well, just to make sure that we're putting things in place that are going to do the job well that we intend to. But working with colleagues, Julia, in SCVS throughout this process, we're looking to adopt good practice across all these elements where we are able to. I think that covers the report. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
That's great. Thanks, Anthony. Really helpful. Any questions or comments for Anthony? Julia, did you want to say anything sort of on behalf of the voluntary sector in Swansea?
I'd like to thank Anthony for all of his hard work within his team. I'd like to thank the council for all of their support with moving this forward. It's a long journey, and I look forward to working closely with you all. Thanks,
Julia. I think just put on record our thanks for the support that you've given this this item and this development, this really important policy for us, going back about easily over a year now, it's about 18 months, I think. It first came to the previous committee, the previous iteration of the committee anyway. So really appreciate that support, Julia, and it's really nice to see us working really closely with the third sector. Les?
Just really to echo the thanks of all the work that's gone into it so far, and hopefully it will soon be able to be sort of put into action, as it were.
Thanks, Les. Yeah, I've only got a couple of questions, and they're sort of practical questions, really. For to do with timescales. I know that we're talking about it continuing to be in a draft for the minute, but just wondering what kind of ballpark figures we've got around the implementation, and also when you referenced those guides from the handbook for managers and the guides for volunteers themselves, is the development of those guides dependent upon the recruitment of the development worker from the shared prosperity fund, or is that something that's sort of in hand anyway?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, no, really good question. Good questions there to help define that kind of time, what we can expect in the coming months. I would say that the work going forward certainly isn't dependent upon that resource from the Shared Prosperity Fund being in place. It certainly will impact on the timescale and the thinking about the resources that we're currently working with. But we do have, as I said, the steering group and the working group together, and we are able to turn our attention to developing the manager's toolkit and handbook. Julia, I might invite Julia to make a comment on what I'm going to say about both the toolkit and the handbook. They are significant pieces of work to think about and develop. It's not just necessarily a case of putting together a narrative around the processes and of what managers should be doing and what volunteers can expect. It's going to be looking at things like developing an induction pack, thinking about induction training for volunteers that might be consistent across the authority, but then how is that supplemented with induction for volunteers within a particular service, and then the training that's in relation to the activities that they'll be undertaking. So it is a case of in some parts of the work, it will be a case of actually developing some of those tools that will actually form part of the toolkit. In other instances, it might, for example, be referring to existing policies within the authority where that's appropriate, but it'll be things like developing consistent data collection around volunteering opportunities and volunteers hosted within the authority, doing that in a consistent way, making sure that the tools are available for managers to be able to dip into and utilize, and then creating the mechanisms for the collection of that data. And I think that's where we start to come into what the role of this officer will be able to bring to the table is. It will be a point of contact within the authority where services departments will be able to refer to, where data will be able to be collected, etc. That's not something that we have really, not a dedicated resource around that. So that will be key there. In terms of timescale, as I say, it's the toolkit and the handbook really that are the next pieces of work, and they are significant pieces of work. I mean, it is something that we are going to be looking at and really focusing on during the next coming months. But how long it will take, obviously, we want to do the best and the most thorough job we can. I would expect it to take months, though, rather than weeks. So I'd be hopeful that we are a significant way along that journey by the time we get to the Christmas period this year. So when we have that resource in post, hopefully early in 2024, then it's just going to add to that where we are at that point, and hopefully then support the rollout of the policy once adopted. I think that answered all the questions that you raised, Chair.
Yeah. Can I come in, Julia?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anthony. They are significant pieces of work. The design of a volunteer manager's toolkit has to reflect other tools, such as all the paperwork and procedures that need to be in place to be mentioned in that toolkit, quite obviously. So there will need to be, there will need to be a lot of detail worked out for that toolkit for managers to be produced, as will the volunteer handbook need to reflect the volunteer induction. From my 20 years experience at SCVS, I would say that the setting up of such pieces and the associated tools would take a lot of months. And I might even say, I really want Anthony to be right, but I would imagine that the officer will be needed to undertake a lion's share of that kind of detailed work. I know the team have done their utmost to push this work forward and have done very successfully. But to get, role descriptions, detailed induction training, risk assessments, sort of supervision requirements, all worked out to be reflected in both the manager's toolkit and the volunteers handbook. I would say that I would be hopeful for these kind of things to be completed by next Volunteers Week, which is next June. And I think that would still require a development officer of some calibre. But I do envisage this work being pushed through, as soon as possible. And it's a brilliant thing that the Shared Prosperity Fund funding has been found to push this work forward. So congratulations to Anthony on that. Yeah,
thanks, Julia. I appreciate the kind of your honesty around that. I mean, I think it's worth noting really that we're a policy committee, and we're not. It's not our job to oversee the day-to-day work of officers. We are a policy committee, and what we're interested in at this moment in time, obviously, is that policy. And just a brief, just quickly, Anthony, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that the implementation of the policy isn't contingent on those large pieces of work being being delivered on the ground.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just for clarity, the policy itself refers to both of these resources being in place. So the manager's toolkit and the volunteers handbook, it refers heavily to that, and the detail of the guidance for the implementation of the policy itself for managers and officers within the authority will be found within the manager's toolkit. And obviously, we want to get that launched at the time, when the policy is being put forward for adoption. The toolkit needs to be in a position where it can be rolled out and it provides the resources required. There's always the opportunity to build on and develop from that point, but it needs to meet, I think, a satisfactory, satisfactory at least standard to accompany the policy before it's adopted.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. I don't have any further questions. Anybody else? Any more? Before we move on? No.
Yeah, a
no.
couple in the room, Chair.
Okay. Do you want to ask them in, Gareth? I can't see who it is.
Baker.
Hi,
What
Mel.
it is, there's a lot of volunteers up in our area in the Pendary. None of them are really registered with Swansea CVS. They from the age of 20 odd up to the age of 70 in the late 70s. Some have been doing it for 30, 40 years volunteering. They've had their CRB checks and that's about it. No training, no backing, no managers to tell them what to do. They go in the building, they help out, they come away. They haven't been, no, how to say, induction into the job, what happens now or anything like that. You just put in as a volunteer, you put your hand up, oh yeah, I'll do it. And then they roped in. Nobody knows which way they're going. And I think a handbook would be perfect, especially for there's a drop-in centre. They haven't got a manager. They got a volunteer manager since the manager's money ran out 10 years ago when he was whatever. And she finds it hard trying to tell the volunteers what to do. They got a mind of their own. Some of them don't like it, especially when you say they come in and they say, oh, I'll volunteer, and they volunteer in. And when she says, oh, I got to do a CRB check on you, they don't like that either. So I think a handbook where the manager could say, right, let's sit down and we'll go through the volunteer handbook and the manager's handbook, even if the manager is not paid. So many of these managers are not paid, but they're managing volunteers. They don't know how to manage the volunteers correctly, which I find very disappointing and upsetting sometimes when I see volunteers walking away and saying, they don't know what they're doing. So I think this idea of the handbook would be great to put out to everywhere, even if they're not on Swansea CVS or on the council register as volunteers. Some buildings have got these volunteers coming in and not guided properly. And they are doing good work for nothing. And yet they haven't got the training with the youngsters. They would like the training so they can take them on that bit further, which I have seen volunteers from volunteering at the age of 20 odd without a job, going into jobs through volunteering, because it can be added to the CV, which I think is a good idea. If that could be added into the book, like to build young people up, more young people to volunteer, to say by volunteering, you can add this to your CV. And that's it.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I certainly think that a lot of the things that you said are certainly some of the principles that kind of underpin the policy. So thanks for raising that. Gareth, was there anybody else that wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anthony. I have read the policy. There's very little in there that you haven't covered, really. But I don't know whether Maya has actually read my mind, but I had a very similar question actually about volunteers. I mean, one of them was fairly simplistic, really. I mean, would there be an age limit for volunteers? And I ask that in the sense that we have likewise in the Uplands area, and I'm sure in other areas in Swansea, we have willing volunteers. And I was thinking in particular to those who sort of look after the little patch, do the little bit cleaning, street cleaning and so forth. It helps the council to keep the streets clean. And having addressed this matter with them, they would be very concerned to have themselves registered and to go through the issues of insurance and training and to meet up with managers. But perhaps the handbook could be a useful tool that one could give out and perhaps to encourage. But my concern is the loss of these willing volunteers, because at the end of the day, they are doing a little bit of work for the council in sort of street cleaning and so forth, and for us as councillors then to have the resources to help them to do that, rather than having it been licensed or formalised in some way through Keep Wales Tidy, as an example. Could it be more on a ad hoc basis where we could give them the resources, which is basically, in this case, is a pair of gloves, a litter picking tool, and a plastic bag to put the material in. That's a concern that I can see. You know, the willingness or the unwillingness probably of many elderly people who do this kind of work registering themselves. I think they fear losing their privacy in some way. Thank you, Chair.
That's fine. Andy, do you want to come back before I bring Les and then Julia in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, of course. And I'll try and pick up on. Thank you for the questions, councillors. I'll try and pick up on all of the points that you raised there. So first of all, yeah, you know, the policy is looking to establish, you know, that consistency of experience for volunteers within the council across all departments. So, you know, it is a corporate policy, and that thing about a consistent experience is really important. What I will say, I'll pick up on. So the policy is it's focused on, I suppose, and I'd invite Julia to come and comment on my comments here. The policy itself will be focused on volunteering opportunities within the council services, and what I'd like to recognise as part of this, and I am mindful of it, is that there are a whole range of volunteering opportunities, not just potentially in the council or alongside the council, you know, but in Swansea as a whole. Some of those volunteering opportunities are formal, and I would very much see this policy addressing formal volunteering opportunities within the council, i.e. those volunteers would have a role description, they'd have someone that, you know, a dedicated officer that they'd be able to speak to and that would support them. And then there are more kind of informal, perhaps shorter term opportunities and activities that people are engaged in that perhaps the policy itself won't focus so much on. As I described earlier, though, I think in my view, the policy that we're looking to establish here is just a starting point on this journey. I think once we have that established, we'll be looking to, and this is where, again, this the introduction of this resource will be a huge help. We'll be able to look at what our strategic goals are, and we'll be able to look at that much wider view of volunteering in Swansea and how the council can support and develop, working with the third sector, working on a wide basis, people who do give up their time and make valuable contributions to their community. So I think the strategy which will follow on for this will pick up a lot more on what our role is, what our role in the council is in supporting people who undertake those roles.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Les and then Julia.
Yeah, really just picking up on both Mike and Alan's point in that, as Anthony's just said, there'll still be a lot of informal volunteering anyway. There'll be a lot of people who will still go out, and the litter picking is a perfect example. There are people down our street who go out ever so often to clear up a bag that's been left or just a bit of general rubbish. Well, we're not going to be constrained into this particular system, but I can also see why this is important, because as years have gone on, it's become far more important to look into things like health and safety issues. And I mean that from both ways. From being a cynic, if somebody gets hurt doing something, we're getting far more like America, getting into this obnoxious, litigious state of mind. So we've got to have that for ourselves to sort of make sure we've got the right processes in place. because once these things do become more formal, both sides have got to make sure we're being treated fairly. So I mean, it's a two-way street on that. All I can say, just to sort of finally add, is I'm sure one of the things that will be upmost is to make sure our volunteers understand why this has been brought in, that it's to help everyone, and as Anthony has said more than once, to have a far more consistent approach to anybody who's involved in formal volunteering. Thanks.
Thanks, Les. Julia?
Thank you to all of the councillors for their excellent points and commenting on Anthony's comments. It feels a bit like that list game we used to play where you had to remember what somebody got at the shop. So I hope I will cover everybody's points. But we are talking about that formalised volunteering. If I can give you an example to kind of highlight that. So currently there are volunteers within Swansea Council's day centres, social services run day centres, adding something extraordinary to the already amazing staff that are employed within that setting to support our older people. Those volunteers sometimes are like the kind of sugar on top of the cake. They're not the entire picture, but they do bring something from the community into our services. What we're talking about is formalising that kind of experience, which we can see is really important in terms of safeguarding, developing people's knowledge and skills so that we're all doing things the Swansea Council way. And also there's something I think one of the councillors quite rightly mentioned, the kind of skills and experience that people build during volunteering. Having a formalised experience will hopefully mean that that person will be able to get a really good reference from the council and maybe even be open to internal opportunities for paid work in the future. We're certainly not talking about stifling community activism. The city is built on it. What we're talking about is those people still have exactly the same free rein, and there may be volunteering opportunities that kind of are almost in a halfway house that have a little bit to take from formality but still retain the beauty of informal volunteering. And the whole journey about the scope of this volunteer policy and strategy is to make sure that we take account of all of that action. But what we're trying to do is build a stronger community in Swansea Council and give good quality training to people and support to enable more people to make Swansea even better.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. That was a really helpful description, I think, of the range and the kind of complex spectrum of volunteering and what this particular policy is attempting to achieve. So thanks again. Repeat what Les said. Really, thanks to everybody for all the work that's been done over the months on this work. My feeling on this is that this doesn't need to come back to committee as a draft again, because I think this is about either the third or the fourth time that it's come here in front of the committee as a draft. But perhaps we'll have a discussion with Democratic Services outside of the meeting in terms of what the next step is in. When we get to the point where the council is adopting the policy proper, so it may be that it comes back at that point. I don't know, but we'll double check and we'll let you know in the next meeting. But my feeling is it probably doesn't need to come back as a draft again. But that's brilliant, and it's a culmination of a lot of work over a lot of time. I'm really pleased to see that, and for us to be a part of that as well is really it's great for us as councillors. So thanks very much to everybody. Before I move on to the next item on the agenda, which is just to run through the work plan, Hannah, did you, Councillor Lawson, did you want to come in and just give a verbal declaration of interest?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Kerry. Could I just make my official declaration that I am an employee of SCDS? Thank you.
And Gareth committed that. That's great. Thanks very much. Okay, so thanks, Gareth. The last item on the agenda now then is just the work plan, and there are some amendments to it from what it was last time. So we would have potentially, the plan was to look at the levelling up process again today, because we were planning to have had a workshop on the levelling up grant process and criteria, which we talked about in the last meeting. But It was a bit ambitious anyway with August, everybody's away, and to be fair to officers, it just wasn't realistic. So we do have provisionally a couple of dates for that workshop. And we did for just Jane to come back and Alison in Dem Services just to confirm. So potentially they could be the 4th or the 9th of October. We'll let you, you'll be informed via email the dates of that. So that's just to go through the levelling up grant process and criteria, which we looked at last time. So that's Jane Whitmore. And probably we'd be looking then to add that to the work plan for the agenda for the 4th of December, Gareth, provisionally.
Okay, Chair.
At the minute, it's just when I'm ready is in there, but it probably needs to be added into that as well. So, and obviously that's why we're not talking about that today, because there hasn't been enough time really with holidays and whatnot. So in terms of the next meeting then is we get into some quite large items, some substantive items to look at. So on the 23rd of October, which is the next one, we'll be looking at the internal residential care provision model of delivery, a statement of purpose, and looking at special guardianship as well at that point. So quite substantive items really. So that's where we're moving towards with the work plan. Any questions or comments on that? Amy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, apologies, sorry, I can't have my camera today, can't use my camera. But the internal residential report, that's great. Just to confirm, we're happy to bring that to the next meeting. I just wanted to clarify the special guardianship one it's support for special guardianship. The ready belongs to the next agenda item, the when I'm ready. So yeah, it's just almost a typo there. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll get that changed for the next time. Thanks, Amy, that's really helpful. Okay, any other thoughts, comments or queries on anything else before we draw the meeting to a close? If not, thanks to all the councillors for your attendance today and your contributions as well. Thanks to all the officers for all the work that you've done and your ongoing support, Democratic Services as well, and Legal, obviously. The next meeting, as I mentioned, is the 23rd of October, so we'll see you then. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chair. I understand from colleagues, Jane Whitmore's on leave at the moment, so we're waiting for her to come back to firm up that date, and we'll get meeting requests out then straight away.
Perfect. Thanks, Gareth. Thanks for your support, and see you.